Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 14th explainer in our series on communication titled Reading Skills. I am genuinely thrilled you're here today because we're going to completely change the way you look at something you do literally thousands of times a day. I mean, really think about it for a second. Before you even fully woke up this morning, how much reading had you already done? You probably squinted at a weather app, maybe scanned a text message from a friend, casually read the label on your coffee beans while you were brewing a pot, or scrolled through a few morning headlines. Because it is just so incredibly ubiquitous, reading is very often treated like a basic, elementary skill. We tend to view it as just the simple, mechanical act of recognizing written words on a page or a screen, right? Something we mastered back in grade school and haven't really thought about since. But effective reading is actually an incredibly complex, dynamic cognitive process. It requires sustained attention, a robust vocabulary, sharp critical thinking, and a really deep awareness of context. It's definitely not merely an academic activity reserved for thick, dusty textbooks. It is a vital, practical life skill that literally shapes our reality and how we interact with the world. In this explainer, we're going to unpack the hidden mechanics of reading, discover exactly how our brains construct meaning on the fly, and crucially, learn how we can stop ourselves from falling into the dangerous trap of misreading. Okay, let's dive right into this.
Scholar Kenneth S. Goodman once famously described reading as a psycholinguistic guessing game. Just let that phrase sink in for a second. A guessing game. We usually think of reading as a passive reception of facts. It's almost like we imagine our brain is just a dry sponge, passively soaking up the ink on the page. But Goodman shattered that illusion entirely. He argued that we are actively making predictions and testing ideas using language cues the entire time we read. Think about how you converse with a really close friend. Sometimes you can literally finish their sentences, right? You know where their thought process is heading before they even get there. Well, your brain is doing the exact same thing with text. We use our prior knowledge, our intuitive grasp of grammar, and our lived life experiences to constantly guess what word or idea is coming next. We are constructing meaning on the fly. So a skilled reader isn't a passive sponge at all. They're an active, strategic, and deeply reflective participant in a rapid-fire game of meaning.
To guide us through this fascinating game today, here's our roadmap. First up, we'll explore the reading illusion. Second, we'll distinguish between basic decoding and deep interpretation. Third, we'll examine the trap of misreading and why it happens to us so often. Fourth, we'll talk about becoming a critical reader. And finally, we'll apply all of these concepts to our modern world by looking at navigating the digital age.
All right, let's start with Section 1, the reading illusion, and the hidden cognitive mechanics operating right beneath the surface.
When you read fluidly, it feels totally effortless. It almost feels like magic. But beneath that smooth surface, your brain is actually working in absolute overdrive. Scholar William Grabe points out that reading involves rapid word recognition, syntactic processing, meaning construction, and strategic comprehension, and all of this is happening simultaneously. You're not just scanning language, you are actively thinking. We can understand this a whole lot better by adapting Shannon and Weaver's famous communication model. If we frame the entire reading experience as a dynamic conversation across time and space, the sender is the writer, and the message is the written text. The channel is the printed or digital medium, whether that's a physical hardcover book or your glowing smartphone screen. And you, the reader, are the receiver. But the absolute most critical part of this entire model is noise. In verbal communication, noise might be actual static on a bad phone line. But in reading, noise is misreading. It's anything that interferes with the message. Now that noise could be literal, like a smudged word on a printed page or a highly distracting pop-up ad on a website, or it could be internal cognitive noise. Keep this core concept of noise in mind, because it really drives everything we're discussing today.
That brings us nicely to Section 2, decoding and deep interpretation, and how we actually move beyond just looking at basic words.
If reading is a communication process, our goal isn't just to decode individual letters, but to really grasp what the sender is trying to say. And this requires us to make a very important distinction between understanding and interpretation. Scholar Walter Kinch explains understanding as constructing a mental representation of the text step by step. You use your prior knowledge to connect words and propositions into a coherent whole. It's kind of like building a house brick by brick. But here's the thing. Understanding is just the baseline. Interpretation is far, far deeper. Louis Rosenblatt's transactional theory argues that meaning isn't just sitting there passively on the page waiting to be found. And it isn't solely invented in your head either. It is a transaction. It's created through the interaction between the text and your personal experiences. Building right on top of this, Stanley Fish introduced this absolutely brilliant concept of interpretive communities. Think about it this way. Imagine a seasoned corporate lawyer reading a news article about a complex court case. Now imagine a poet reading that exact same article. They're going to interpret the nuances completely differently, right? That's because they belong to different interpretive communities. They bring vastly different expectations, entirely different vocabularies, and totally unique professional lenses to that reading transaction.
Which leads us directly into Section 3, the trap of misreading, and the very real danger of that communication noise we talked about earlier.
Because interpretation is highly subjective and transactional, the constant threat of noise corrupting the writer's message is always hovering right over us. And misreading isn't just a minor oops moment. It has very real-world consequences, ranging from missed deadlines at work to severely damaged relationships. So what actually creates this internal noise? Well, there are 5 major culprits. First up, assumptions. We skim an email thinking we already know exactly what it says, completely missing crucial details. Second, selective reading. We literally only notice the parts of a text we already agree with, and our brains subconsciously ignore the rest. Third, lack of vocabulary. If we don't know key terms, we just guess, and unfortunately, we often guess wrong. Fourth, emotional reaction. Now this one is absolutely huge. Think about reading an email from your boss before you've had your morning coffee, maybe when you're already feeling a bit anxious or annoyed. You might interpret a completely neutral request as harsh, stinging criticism. But if you read that exact same email after a great lunch when you're in a good mood, it sounds perfectly fine. The words on the screen didn't change at all, but your internal emotional noise did. Finally, lack of context. A single sentence ripped out of its original paragraph can mean something entirely different, skewing your interpretation wildly.
To understand exactly why our brains trick us into making these false assumptions, we really have to look at schema theory, proposed by Anderson and Pearson. Schemas are our prior knowledge structures. You can kind of think of them as massive mental filing cabinets stored in your brain. When we read something, we quickly open a specific file folder to help us categorize and understand the new information coming in. And usually, this is an incredible, highly efficient cognitive shortcut. But it becomes a severe trap when we try to force brand new information into an old assumption. Opening the wrong filing cabinet makes us physically miss words that are right there in front of us. For instance, if you strongly expect a particular writer to take a specific political position, your schema might cause you to misread a perfectly balanced, neutral discussion as a heavily biased argument. Your brain literally overwrites the actual text on the page so that it perfectly matches the file folder it already opened up in your mind. It's wild.
So how on earth do we fix this? Let's move over to Section 4, becoming a critical reader and actively evaluating texts.
This is exactly how we actively defend ourselves against that communication noise and those sneaky cognitive traps. Scholar Catherine Wallace points out that critical reading involves questioning texts, recognizing underlying ideology, and understanding how language shapes social meanings. The absolute crucial point here is that no text is truly neutral. None of them. Writers deliberately choose specific words, specific examples, images, and sentence structures to actively influence your interpretation. A critical reader doesn't just passively accept the information handed to them on a silver platter. They stop and they ask, is this writer trying to inform me right now, or are they trying to persuade me? Honestly, in today's clickbait-driven digital landscape, that is arguably the single most valuable question any reader can ask. A critical reader evaluates whether claims are actually supported by hard facts, or if they're just propped up by highly emotional language and exaggeration. They consciously make the choice to read beyond the flashy headline to evaluate the actual solid evidence. To put this into daily practice, researchers Presley and Afflerbach identified 5 highly practical, active reading strategies. Step 1. Predicting. Before you even start reading, check out the title and the headings to anticipate the topic. This helps you deliberately choose the right mental filing cabinet right from the start. Step 2. Questioning. Continually ask yourself what the author actually means and where their argument is heading while you're in the middle of reading. Step 3. Clarifying. This is a big one. If something doesn't make sense, do not just gloss over it. We all do that. Stop, go back, reread, and figure it out. Step 4. Summarizing. Periodically pause to capture the main ideas just to ensure you haven't lost the thread of the argument. And finally, Step 5. Evaluating. Reflect on the text after you've totally finished. Are the arguments actually logical? Can you spot any clear bias? Using these active steps before, during, and after engaging with the text keeps you firmly anchored to the actual meaning, cutting right through all that noise.
Now, becoming a critical reader also means knowing exactly when to shift your gears to prevent total mental burnout. Intensive reading is what you do with a heavy legal contract, a super complex academic paper, or a detailed instruction manual. It's careful, highly detailed reading for maximum comprehension. You're analyzing definitions, structure, and tiny nuances. But let's be totally honest here. No human brain can intensively read all day long. The cognitive fatigue is very, very real. That's exactly why we also rely on extensive reading. This is when you're reading longer text for general knowledge, fluency, or just pure enjoyment. Think about getting completely lost in a great novel or flipping through a magazine. Your approach absolutely has to shift depending on your purpose. It's really just a matter of self-preservation. You wouldn't rapidly skim a binding legal contract, and you certainly wouldn't intensively analyze every single comma in a fun fiction book. Matching your strategy to your immediate purpose is a true hallmark of a highly skilled reader.
All right, let's bring all of this academic theory into our modern, everyday reality with Section 5, Navigating the Digital Age. Because let's face it, the way we read today is fundamentally different than it was even just 20 years ago. Scholar Julie Coyro's research really highlights the unique, incredibly demanding challenges of online reading. When we're online, we aren't just calmly reading left to right down a static, quiet page. We are rapidly locating information, jumping constantly between non-linear hyperlinks. We are constantly forced to evaluate source credibility and detect misinformation in real time. And perhaps most exhaustingly of all, we are synthesizing multimodal texts. Think about it. You're reading a news article, but suddenly an auto-playing video is shouting at you from the right sidebar. A colorful, interactive chart is embedded smack in the middle of the text, and app notifications are dropping down from the top of your screen. You aren't just reading anymore. Your brain is literally acting as a high-stress air traffic controller, frantically trying to make sense of words, images, and videos all being thrown at you simultaneously. This highly chaotic environment demands absolute hypervigilance to avoid misreading.
And it's not just long articles either. It's our daily minute-to-minute communication. Let's take an incredibly simple text message, the word okay with a period at the end. Just a single word. Is this enthusiastic agreement? Is it deep, passive-aggressive irritation? Is it just total indifference? A simple period at the end of the word okay can send a friend or a coworker into an absolute spiral of anxiety. Why? Because digital communication completely strips away the tone of voice, the body language, and the immediate context. It creates massive, massive amounts of noise. A critical reader knows to avoid over-interpreting short, contextless messages exactly like this one. Instead of letting their schemas and their emotional reactions run totally wild, they hit pause. They don't jump to conclusions, and they actively seek clarification.
So, we arrive at our final, vital thought for today. As you navigate the massive, often chaotic sea of digital information out there, I really want you to ask yourself this question. Are your digital schemas protecting you from manipulation, or are they leaving you highly vulnerable to it? Remember, reading is an active transaction. You are not a sponge. You have the power to control the noise, deliberately evaluate the evidence, and construct accurate, meaningful interpretations. Don't be a passive receiver, be a critical, strategic reader. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. If you found this breakdown helpful and want to continue mastering your communication skills, please make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel. I'll see you in the next one.